Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our thoughts for this first Sunday in Advent. I wonder if any of you remember ever watching a programme called Tales of the Unexpected. Each of the storylines finished with a twist. I wonder how you were able to cope with the unexpected. Well, the answer probably depends upon what the unexpected turns out to be. If you discover that you've won first prize in a competition, or you've inherited a fortune from a long-lost relative, then the chances are that you would respond positively. On the other hand, if you were to return home from an evening out and discover a burst pipe, or you'd been wheel clamped, well, the response, I guess, would be somewhat different. But our response will also be shaped by what sort of expectations we have in the first place. An old saying says, much of what we see depends upon what we're looking for. Well, today we're thinking about the Advent theme of expectation, asking what we expect in terms of the return of Christ. And so we begin with the Old Testament, where the expectation of the Messiah was a recurring theme. It was this hope that sustained the Jewish nation through countless years of adversity. Yet when Jesus came, only a handful of people were ready to receive him. Far from preparing people for his coming, expectation had the opposite effect. The majority of people had made up their minds in advance as to the sort of Messiah that God would send. And Jesus failed to match those expectations. There is a danger that today we can make the same mistake. We may believe that we are prepared for the return of Christ, that we're ready to welcome him when he comes again. But our expectation may be a hindrance rather than a help. But this Advent, we have the opportunity to examine our ideas about the way that God works. A few years ago, one of the hit television shows was called Blind Date. Artificial and stage-managed it may have been, and yet thousands of viewers had delighted in the moment when a contestant's expectations were either fulfilled or cruelly dashed, as the moment of truth arrived and they met the date they had chosen face to face. For some it brought relief, for others horror. Well, we may not have personally experienced a blind date, but we will have all made assumptions about people, many of which will have turned out to be completely unfounded. We assume on first meeting someone that we're going to get on like a house on fire, only to end up feeling awkward and tongue-tied. We imagine the intellectual to be aloof and reserved, and that the comedian will be the life and soul of the party, only to find the roles are reversed. How many times, with the benefit of hindsight, have we ended up saying, well, they weren't what I expected? Our expectations are often flawed. The superstar who is idolised by millions of fans across the world proves to be just as human as the next person. They have their own problems and weaknesses. For some, the dream home they have purchased turns out to have the neighbours from hell, dry rot, and planning permission for a dual carriageway at the bottom of the garden. Expectations have a habit of being wide of the mark. And it's in this danger of misplaced expectations that lie behind the words of the prophet Malachi. To those eagerly seeking forward to the advent of the Messiah, he brought a stern warning that the day of the Lord would come upon them like refiner's fire. a day to be feared rather than welcomed, for it would bring God's judgment and wrath. How was it that the people's expectations could be so wide of the mark? Where had they gone wrong? Well, the answer is that they had put the future before the present, forgetting that the one should influence the other, that their hope should change the way they lived, and the way they lived helped to bring closer the fulfillment of their hope. Instead of working for the Messiah's kingdom, it would seem that they were working against it, lying, cheating, deceiving, exploiting the poor and oppressing the weak. In having expectations for a glorious future age, they'd forgotten their responsibilities to God in the time and place where he had put them. It's no wonder that so many of them failed to recognize the Messiah when he came. They had become so preoccupied with the event of his coming that they had overlooked the sort of Messiah they should be expecting. We might say it was a sad mistake. But would we really have been any different? Today, our expectation is of the second coming of Christ. And for many, that is the day when Jesus will return to put all the world's wrongs right, and a new kingdom will come. There are passages in both the Old and New Testaments that speak of the Son of Man returning as judge and king. Jesus spoke in such terms himself, but he also maintained that the kingdom of heaven is within us. The fact is, as Jesus warned the apostles, that we don't know much about last times, nor do we need to. For what should concern us now is the present. What matters is how we live our daily lives, how evident the values of love, mercy, justice, and peace are in our lives. If all our hopes are on a future time when we expect Jesus to come again, we may be guilty of closing our minds to what God is doing amongst us and in us now. We don't need to know when the time will be, how it will come, or even what it will be like. What matters is that we recognise that the second coming has implications for today and every day. For he is already active in our world, and he needs us to be involved. So what does Advent mean to you? Is it just that 4 weeks leading up to Christmas Day, perhaps with a carol service tucked into it? Or is this actually a time of recognising Christ's first coming into our world, but also the reality that he is still here working amongst us? May God bless you as we commence this season of Advent and we prepare not only physically for celebrating the birth of Jesus, but we also prepare spiritually for recognising God's presence and continued working in our lives.